My parents gave me up for adoption because they were still in high school when I was born. 24 years later, I found them. My mum had me when she was just 14, and I was 24 when I was given up for adoption. I know it sounds crazy, but my parents told me about her growing up, and I still have the letter she wrote me asking if they said they'd give it to me when they felt like it. It's pretty wild reading it sometimes, knowing it was a kid who wrote it. She's sorry she couldn't be my mom but hopes I'm happy. She was cool with having contact, but we moved for my dad's job when I was 11, and then it seemed impossible to find her. Luckily, I think she's working at this small restaurant, and I keep going, but she doesn't know it's me. We talk sometimes and she seems like a nice lady. Sometimes when she says something like, "Do you want a refill, honey?" or uses another term like that, I want to tell her and let her know that I'm right here. I don't know why it makes me a little nervous, but we talk sometimes and she seems really genuine. If it's not super busy, she's more open to talking about random stuff. I literally drive 2 hours to come eat at this place just to see her. It's like she knows me already because I'm there once or twice a week for the past 3 months. She says hi with a big smile, but I wish she knew. Update 1, I finally told her. It was pretty heavy. My heart was beating super fast the entire time. I waited for her to finish her shift until they were done closing up the restaurant. After she finished closing up, she saw me waiting in the parking lot. We exchanged greetings, but then I told her there was something important she needed to know. I apologized for keeping it from her for so long. She didn't react until I actually showed her the letter. Then she started crying and screaming at the same time. I have to tell you about my son's speech. She just saw it for the first time. It was pretty intense. The next thing I know, she's hugging me. But then she pulled back and asked if it's okay to hug me. Of course it is. So we're just there, hugging and crying in the parking lot. It really got to her. Her legs gave out for a second. I had to hold her up for a minute while she was still hugging me. What really got to me was her saying, "Look how big you've got." Also, hearing her cry made me cry too. She went back to open the restaurant, and we sat there for hours talking about everything. We had coffee, ate a slice of their pie, and we talked about anything and everything. She said that the second time I came to the restaurant, she had a feeling that I felt really familiar, but she couldn't believe it could be me. So she pushed that feeling down. She said that for years after I was adopted, she saw kids around my age and used to think they were me. Then she would start crying in public, which really messed with her mind and made her depressed. So she didn't want to do the same. When she first started seeing me in the restaurant, she said it looked so much like my biological dad when he was younger. We talked about it. They also talked about him. They stayed in touch with each other in case I ever reached out to one of them, so it would be easier to contact the other. I didn't have any hope of finding my biological dad since he was never mentioned, so I'm glad they both planned for this future scenario. She told me about how they both wanted to keep me, especially my biological dad. He didn't want me to be adopted, but he knew they had to because they were just kids. It took him a long time to get past it after I was born. That's why he didn't leave anything behind, because he didn't want to believe he would ever get to see me again. We talked for hours. We talked until almost 2 in the morning. She wanted to know everything about me, but her main concerns were whether I was happy, whether my parents were good to me, and whether I had a happy childhood. I told her I was happy and that my parents were good to me. She thanked me for helping to give me this life. We both cried again, but she cried the most. Everything was very emotional for her. She would look really happy, but then get sad again after my 18th birthday. She was hoping I would find her, which is why she stayed in the same city. But since I didn't, she always thought maybe I resented her, Wasn't told he was adopted, or maybe had decided it was better not to have her around. It made me feel bad for I didn't tell her sooner. She said it wasn't my fault and that I did the right thing by going at my own pace. She's really sweet. The way she kept looking at me with the biggest smile made me emotional sometimes. It makes you think about how someone who's been a total stranger your whole life can look at you with so much love. It was great to learn so much about each other. She asked me to have dinner soon to keep talking. She also said that if I'm interested at some point in the future, I should come over to her house so I can meet her husband. That all sounded really great. We exchanged numbers, and after I left, she sent a text saying thank you for giving her this gift that she didn't know about. My girlfriend came over and she hugged me while I cried. I wanted to give you an update on how it went. I met my biological dad, and it was more emotional than I thought it would be. I didn't know anything about him, which made it more nerve-wracking for me. With my biological mother, it was different because I watched her from afar and got to know her a little before it all came out. I asked my biological mother if she could be there too, just because she knows him better. So it was just the two of us waiting for him at this park. He was already crying before we even got to him. This guy is strong too, so he pulled me in for the biggest bear hug, and we were both crying. He told me he wants me to know that he loved me so much and he loves me. I lost count of how many times he came back for one more hug. This really got to him, and he kept saying thank you God a few times while looking at my face. He told me how much they loved me even back then, which meant a lot to me. I have to admit that it made me cry. He gave me a big hug too. I'm sure it seemed strange to everyone at the park. My biological father said he cried so many times just driving over here. He didn't think he had any more tears until he saw us. When we were all sitting down, I realized that my biological mother was right when she said we look alike. He's older, but there were still some crazy similarities. He brought gifts, which was a nice surprise. He told me I don't have to keep them if I don't want to, but he felt weird not coming with anything. He's wanted to give this to me for a long time. One was a teddy bear holding a picture frame of him. At the hospital, he was 15 years old. It's still pretty amazing to think that he gave me a journal. He said he started writing to me years after I was adopted. He was in therapy and that helped him cope. He wanted to give them to me one day, so they'd always be connected. I haven't read everything yet, but some of the pages were his thoughts. It was as if he was talking directly to me, sharing his feelings about finding out she was pregnant and then going through the adoption process. He wrote about everything going on in his mind when he first got to hold me as a baby. I didn't even know he was at the hospital too. What I was expecting. It really got me. I read some more of what he wrote last night. That really got me crying. I'm sad to think how much this affected them emotionally for years. Also, I think it's pretty sweet he wanted to write this for me. We talked about his own life, which was pretty hard. His struggles with home. He also wrote about his life and the feelings he had about giving me up. He wanted to know everything about me, basically with the same questions my biological mother had. I made sure they knew they made the right decision because my life was pretty great. He looked like he wanted to cry when he knew that because that's all they hoped for. It was something he'd always wondered about for years. My biological mother left a bit after we were more comfortable so we could talk more in private. Once it didn't feel too awkward between us, he told me stories about how he met my biological mother. Sometimes he'd point out stuff he noticed about me that reminds him of her. He was really open about sharing everything, like he was getting ready for this meeting. He hoped it would happen and prayed every day to see me again because he had so many things he wanted to tell me. Overall, it was a really good first meeting. I'm glad how it went. I've told my parents about all this, and they are keen to meet my bio parents again if I'm comfortable with that. Obviously, if my bio parents are too, we'll see when that happens. I don't know how it's going to feel for me, as they've met each other before I was even born. I'd never had them in the same place, so it'll be interesting. My parents and I met up yesterday to have breakfast so I could tell them everything. My mum was really happy about how it went, she even cried. My dad was proud because he knew how hard it was for me. It's been a few months since I found my bio mom and I wasn't ready to make contact yet. I'm really happy to have their support because it's hard not to feel guilty about wanting to know more about my bio parents. They gave me a really good life, so for a while it felt like maybe to them I was showing that it wasn't good enough. I'd rather have my bio parents, but they've told me many times that I should do this for myself. They know how much I love them, and I really do. Finding them and meeting them was hard, but it was so worth it to me. Seeing their reactions made it feel even more worth it. I still can't believe it sometimes.